frightened too. Your muscles start to contract, trying to force you to open your mouth to breathe. And you're fighting against that.
Hey guys, Jared here. Getting a new job can feel like a new chapter in your life, but in some cases, it can also be the last. Whether it's due to a lack of training, improper safety protocols, or a company's negligence, some workplaces are prone to serious accidents. Today we'll be looking at some of the worst workplace accidents in human history. Warning, viewer discretion is strongly advised, and our deepest condolences go out to the families and friends of the victims featured in today's video. What mistake left 5 divers trapped in an underwater oil pipe? How did a teen get engulfed in a silo? And why did a bread company's greed cost the lives of 2 employees? The Mousehole. 41-year-old Gordon Moffat, a husband and father of 2, had years of experience working on oil rigs. On October 9th, 2000, while aboard the Magellan, 120 miles east of Aberdeen, Scotland, Moffat was tasked with servicing hydraulic hoses. The job itself wasn't too complex, but it did require him to be lifted about 50 feet above the lower deck. Knowing the potential dangers of the job, from explosions to chemical exposure, harsh weather, and even machine failures, Moffat made sure to strap into his safety harness and take his time. Once the job was complete, Moffat radioed the banksman, who worked as the winch operator's eyes and ears. He told them he was ready to be lifted to clear the hoses before being lowered to the deck. Sadly, communication error led to a horrifying accident. After being lifted a few feet, Moffat told the banksman to stop. The message was relayed to the winch operator, but didn't get through to his radio due to a malfunction. The winch operator continued to lift Moffat toward the Mousehole, a 10-inch round hole through which the safety cable runs. As he was being pulled up, both Moffat and the banksman yelled, "Stop," to no avail. The banksman then ran to the emergency intercom to tell the control room to stop the winch. However, because the emergency intercom is recorded, there was a delay, and by the time the winch was shut off, it was too late. Moffat's body had been pulled through the Mousehole, crushing him to death. But the reality of the situation was much more gruesome. His body was so disfigured that he was hardly recognizable. Doctors referred to it as a virtual transection, meaning his lower abdomen had been torn apart. The company implemented new safety protocols, including mandatory permits for high-risk operations and the presence of supervisors and safety personnel on board during these operations. My only survival tip here would be to ensure that all safety protocols are in place before starting a task that you know can be dangerous. Our next workplace accident takes us to another pipeline tragedy, which cost the lives of 4 divers. The Paria diving tragedy. On February 25th, 2022, 5 divers entered the waters off Trinidad and Tobago to repair a leaking U-shaped oil pipeline 60 feet deep and 1,200 feet long. The state-owned pipeline belonging to Paria Fuel Trading Company connected berth 5 and berth 6, which are loading docks where oil tankers receive or discharge fuel. The divers, Christopher Boudrum, Kazim Ali Jr., Yusuf Henry, Rishi Nagasser, and Faisal Kurban worked for LMCS, which Paria had contracted to repair the pipe near berth 6. An 8-foot by 8-foot air-filled chamber enabled divers to work in a dry environment, even though they were 15 feet underwater. Everything was fine, until the team removed an inflatable plug used to prevent oil and gas from escaping. What the team didn't know was that the pipe had been drained weeks earlier, leading to a pressure differential. When they removed the inflatable plug, the pipeline acted as a vacuum, quickly sucking up seawater and the divers into the 30-inch diameter pipe. Battered around and dragged 700 feet, all 5 of the injured divers finally came to a stop. At least 2 were suffering from broken bones, low on oxygen, and covered in oil. Nagasser was too injured to move. The other 4 divers managed to link together, forming a human chain, tucking their feet under the person's shoulders in front of them. At the front of the chain was Boudrum, who wasn't as severely injured as his colleagues. As they started making their way up the pipeline, they found 2 oxygen tanks that had been sucked through and shared them. Once they reached the end of an air pocket, Boudrum swam ahead to see how far it was until the pipeline curved, an area called the elbow. When he got there, he realized the water wasn't high enough for him to get himself out, so he screamed for help. Fortunately, his screams were heard, and 2 divers came down to pull him up. Boudrum told the rescue team his friends were still alive, but badly injured. Volunteer divers were ready to attempt a rescue, but the company in charge stopped them, citing safety concerns.
LMCS stated that it was prevented from conducting such a rescue in the pipeline by Paria, notwithstanding that LMCS had divers and equipment available to conduct the rescue.
After assessing the situation, the Coast Guard decided the rescue mission was too risky, but the volunteer divers attempted to enter the pipe anyway. They were stopped by armed guards who claimed that Paria had stated that no one else was allowed in. Paria then decided to try using cameras to see where the men were stuck. At this point, they had been trapped for 9 hours. Despite Paria telling the families of the men that they were doing everything they could to rescue them, it was only a matter of time before things would turn grim, and they'd die due to a lack of oxygen. Desperate to be saved, the trapped divers continued to bang on the pipes, alerting any potential rescue divers that they were still alive. Sadly, help was never going to come. A press conference was held 48 hours after the incident, and Paria announced publicly that the operation had turned into a recovery mission. The 4 divers' bodies were recovered over the next few days, with an autopsy revealing one of the men may have lived for up to 39 hours before passing. This is another situation where negligence led to the untimely death of experienced workers. Had the team known that the pipeline was empty, they likely would have approached the task differently. Working in the ocean isn't the only place where accidents like these can happen. Our next story killed more than 100 workers due to, you guessed it, negligence. The Vaal Reefs mining disaster. On May 10, 1995, miners were chipping away inside the Vaal Reefs mine in Orkney, South Africa. Known for its gold resources, the mine was one of the country's most precious at the time. In 1994, it yielded more than 155,000 pounds of the mineral, worth $845 million. With dozens of levels and hundreds of miles of tunnels, this place was like an underground maze. To ensure productivity, the mine had 2-tier elevators, which could transport hundreds of workers at a time. It also had an underground train to move materials and supplies. Around 10:30 p.m., 104 miners were riding one of the elevators during a shift change. As they were rising, a 2,400-pound train came barreling down the shaft, landing on top of the elevator and snapping its support cable. Both the packed elevator and train continued to drop over 1,600 feet before smashing to the ground. Within seconds, over 100 miners were dead at the bottom of Shaft 2. Describing the horrific scene, James Lathe, president of the National Union of Mine Workers, told the press, "Pieces of flesh were scattered all over as a 2-floor mining elevator was crushed into a 1-floor tin box. The imagery of that makes me sick to my stomach." But it gets worse. Due to the extreme heat of the mine, the bodies quickly started to decompose, making some of the victims unrecognizable. Over the course of 2 days, just over half of the bodies were recovered. Following the tragedy, an investigation was launched. It was determined that there were no safety blocks in Shaft 2, which would have prevented the train from entering the wrong tunnel. Evidence also showed that a detaching hook snapped upon impact with the train, causing the elevator to plummet. This led the South African Society in Mining Research Council to require detaching hooks to become more sturdy under significant impact and to be able to hold at least 11,000 pounds. It seems those involved in the mine would have been killed instantly by the force, but our next victim likely suffered a slower, more painful death, with rescue workers comparing it to being swallowed by quicksand.
A couple different occasions he said, "Mom, he's got us going into the silo." He knew it wasn't right, but yet he continued to do it because that's what his job was.
On May 30th, 2011, most Americans were making plans on how they would spend Memorial Day. However, Thomas Osier of Michigan saw it as just another day at work. The 18-year-old high schooler worked on a local farm, and on this particular day was assigned to work inside one of the corn silos at Pine Grove Farm, a job that is known to come with the risk of being engulfed by the grain. Sadly, that's exactly what happened to Thomas. As he was scraping off corn stuck to the silo walls, the grain underneath him gave way, swallowing him. Patrick Pickett, who was shoveling corn at the base of the silo, first realized something was wrong when he saw Tommy's iron rod slide out the bottom door. Then came Tommy's cell phone. And finally, Pickett saw the 18-year-old's leg. Despite his best efforts, the weight of the corn was too heavy for Pickett to pull Tommy out. When emergency authorities arrived on scene, they also had trouble pulling Tommy from the silo. Finally, after more than 4 hours, they were able to retrieve his body. It took a total of 35 emergency personnel and farm workers to do so. The details of what his remains looked like were heartbreaking.
What broke my heart the most was to see it had completely dislodged his jaw. To see his form, his physical form, and his jaw was completely dislodged. And the corn had impacted and packed it so much it was in his lungs. The corn was in his lungs.
That sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. Following Tommy's death, an investigation was launched. The farm's owner, Dave Schwab, was fined $7,000. After Schwab posted warning signs and fixed the augers on the silo floor, which helps the corn flow more easily, the fine was cut in half. To survive a situation like this, you'd need to create an air pocket with your hands by covering your mouth while waiting to be rescued. But with the sheer force of the grain pushing up against you, it would be a race against the clock.
I'm stuck. Yeah, at this point, I'm not getting out.
It's amazing, the pressure that's there.
Most farms make sure their workers wear safety harnesses when entering silos, but for some smaller operations, this isn't always the case. Before we move on to another horrible workplace accident, make sure to like and subscribe for more life-saving content.
Authorities say 17-year-old Isaiah Beddox of Copley died yesterday after he was pulled into a commercial wood chipper in North Whitehall.
On August 9th, 2022, Isaiah Beddox and a friend were working together at a summer job for a tree cutting company in Lehigh County, Pennsylvania. Beddox was a month away from entering his 4th year at Lehigh Career and Technical Institute for Automotive Mechanics. Tasked with removing 10 trees from a property, Beddox and his friend got to work. Sadly, Isaiah was pulled into the wood chipper after a piece of his clothing got caught on the machine itself. Within seconds, he suffered significant injuries. According to reports, the incident occurred around 1:35 p.m., and emergency personnel were on site within 10 minutes. After seeing the severity of his injuries, which included an amputated leg, an emergency helicopter was called in. While waiting to be airlifted to the hospital, Isaiah was drifting in and out of consciousness. Sadly, he was officially pronounced dead at 2:55 p.m. His death was ruled accidental. Ben Kirkpatrick, one of the EMS workers on the scene, explained, "That was the most gruesome call I've ever run." Surviving an accident with machinery is situational, but in any case, you should always turn the machine off immediately. If your hand or foot gets caught, don't try to pull it out because this can do more harm than good, especially if you're bleeding profusely. Call emergency services and, if possible, apply a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. Isaiah's death was an unfortunate tragedy. Our next workplace accident also involves machinery, but this one could have easily been prevented. Baked alive in a bread oven. On May 18, 1998, 47-year-old David Mays and 44-year-old Ian Erickson, both engineers, were expecting to repair a belt inside a bread oven at the Fresha Bakeries factory in Leicester, England. The grid on the oven's conveyor belt had dislodged and fallen to the bottom. The two men were asked to climb inside and reposition it. I think you see where I'm going with this one. When operating, the belt reached 500 degrees and took 17 minutes to pass through the oven. Given the incredible heat, the workers knew they needed to let the oven cool off before entering, and were under the impression it had been off for some time before they crawled in. Sadly, they were wrong. Within 5 minutes, the men were screaming into their walkie-talkies that the oven was too hot. With no way of reversing the conveyor belt, Mays and Erickson were forced to endure agonizing pain being burnt alive, while the belt made its way through the oven over the course of 17 minutes. Erickson was pulled out of the other side of the oven by factory workers and died in front of their eyes. Mays is believed to have passed out and was killed due to 80% burns over his body and multiple fractures since he was caught inside the machinery. The saddest part of all of this is that the men died because the factory's management prioritized profits over the safety of their employees. This was revealed in 2001, when the company and management were taken to court. It was determined that the two men had entered the oven just 2 hours after it was shut off, despite the fact that it would have taken 12 hours for it to cool before it was deemed safe to enter. Using fans to cool the outside of the oven, the men believed it was okay to enter, as the temperature showed 104 degrees. The company also decided not to remove the oven's side panels to save on the cost, requiring the men to enter through the front of the oven. Our last workplace accident may be the most gruesome of all: the Russian lathe accident. In November 2020, a man working in a factory in Russia died while operating an industrial lathe. The footage is incredibly disturbing, and we will not be showing it here. I think once you see the animation, you'll understand why. For those unaware, a lathe is a versatile machine used in many industries. Its function is to shape materials, including wood, metal, and plastic. It does so by spinning these materials at an incredibly high speed while grinding and pressing them against a cutting tool. The details of what happened in this situation are unclear, but based on video evidence, a worker got too close to the machine and was pulled in. Within seconds, pieces of the man started flying all over the place. By the time another employee was able to activate the emergency shutoff, it was far too late. The victim was completely dismembered, with bone and flesh scattered across the machine and factory floor. Now, we had to tone down the animation a bit, so I'll just let you guys use your imaginations with this one. Unfortunately, I don't have a practical survival tip to offer here, aside from exercising extreme caution when working with such dangerous machinery. If the machine had safety barriers around it, such as fencing, then the chances of this happening would have been significantly reduced. Proper training should also be required to ensure workers know how to operate and respond in the event of an emergency. But even then, it seems like nothing could have been done to save this man. The sad reality of many of these stories is that with proper training and protocols, many of the victims could still be around today. In most of these cases, the companies were sued and the victims' families were compensated, but no amount of money can bring a loved one back. That's why it's essential to hold those responsible accountable, in the hope that it can create change and save lives. From wearing appropriate clothing to ensuring workers are aware of the dangers prior to starting their jobs, the only thing we could hope for is that these stories provide a stark reminder to employers of how important it is to follow procedures. If you have any workplace accident stories, let us know in the comments below. As awful as these deaths were, they were at least accidental. The same can't be said for a handful of the worst deaths in human history. Check that video out to fulfill your morbid curiosity. We'll see you in another episode of How to Survive.